Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer. Thanks to basically everyone who watches the channel for this one. You saw the title, you saw the thumbnail. I'm not a hero, but when Wizards prints a card that spawns this many rules questions, the time has come to be a superhero. Let's go. We'll start with the easiest level and we'll work our way up. Let's say that Amy plays a Deadpool and has it exchange the text with this Grizzly Bears. What does each card look like now? So as you can see here, the text box is just the thing on the lower half of the card that contains text. In addition to rules text, the text box may also contain italicized words with no rules meaning, such as flavor text. So yeah, this means that Deadpool will get the other creature's flavor text and vice versa. Watermarks and guild icons also count as part of the text box for stuff that cares about that. That's not super obvious from what it says in this rule here, but remember that all the stuff that cares about flavor text and watermarks and that sort of stuff is silver bordered anyway, so I'm confident making this official unruling. Now this gives us an answer to a practical concern that some of my experienced viewers might have thought about. Normally, when you're trying to exchange two things, if one part of the exchange can't happen, then the whole thing can't happen. This distinction between a text box and rules text becomes important here. Although Grizzly Bears does not have any rules text, it certainly does have a text box, and that's where its flavor text is. You know what isn't in the text box, though? Abilities that the creature gains, like from effects that say stuff like enchanted creature has flying. So anything like that would not be getting exchanged. Same goes for ability counters. Now, exchange of words has a duration for how long its text box exchanging effect lasts, but Deadpool doesn't. This means with Deadpool, the exchange is permanent. There is an asterisk here, which is that if a permanent leaves the battlefield, it becomes a new game object with no connection to its previous self. And this means if Deadpool leaves the battlefield, the other creature will keep Deadpool's abilities, and vice versa. The other major difference between how Deadpool and Exchange of Words functions is that Exchange of Words has a triggered ability, whereas Deadpool has a replacement effect. The major practical difference between these has to do with responding. Like all triggered abilities, Exchange of Words uses the stack, and so you would have to choose the targets and then everyone would be able to respond to the ability. For example, if one of the targets had an ability like this Secure Tribe Elder, you could sacrifice it in response to the Exchange of Words ability and no exchange would be happening. On the other hand, with Deadpool, players do not get priority to cast spells or activate abilities in between when you say what creature you're exchanging with and when that exchange actually happens. Now, obviously, you could respond to the Deadpool spell by sacrificing your Secure Tribe Elder, but the Deadpool player doesn't have to say what creature that they're going to be exchanging with until right before it happens, at which point it would be too late to counter Deadpool or sacrifice the other creature. Next up, let's take a look at what would happen if Amy used a Deadpool to exchange text boxes with Nick's Master Thief, which he's used to steal Olive's Soul Ring. Now, for such a simple question, there's a fair bit to unpack here. First off, let's observe that Master Thief losing its abilities will not cause control of Soul Ring to change. The effect set up by Master Thief's ETB ability lasts as long as you control Master Thief. Taking away Master Thief's ability after this continuous effect has been set up will change nothing. Now second, we'll need to look at the timing of Deadpool exchanging text boxes. This applies as Deadpool enters, meaning that it will have the relevant abilities before it enters the battlefield. This means that at the time Deadpool enters the battlefield, it will have an ability that says, when Master Thief enters, gain control of target artifact. Well, okay, although Deadpool's name is outside of its text box and therefore it doesn't change, text that uses an object's own name is interpreted by the game to mean this specific object. If Deadpool gains an ability that uses a creature's name in its text, the game will interpret that name as referring to Deadpool. Therefore, Amy will get to gain control of target artifact as long as she controls Deadpool. If she chooses that same Soul Ring as Nick originally stole, then there will be two continuous effects acting on the Soul Ring, and the most recent one will win, giving it to Amy. Now, following the theme of how Deadpool interacts with triggered abilities, let's take a look at this Worldspine Worm. If you exchange text boxes with one of these, what will happen when Deadpool dies? What about when Worldspine Worm dies? Now, to answer this, first let's recall what we said about how long Deadpool's effect lasts. After Deadpool's ability applies, each creature will have the other's text box indefinitely, with the asterisk being that once a creature leaves the battlefield, it becomes a new object with no relation to its former self, meaning that it would get its original text box back. Next, let's consider how the game checks for triggered abilities. Abilities that trigger when a creature dies are called leaves the battlefield abilities, and the game looks back in time and checks what the game state looked like immediately before the trigger event happened to decide whether such abilities would trigger. Immediately before being put into the graveyard, Deadpool had a Make 3 Worms ability, and the Worldspine Worm didn't. So Deadpool dying would cause that ability to trigger. Experienced viewers already know what I'm about to say and why I chose Worldspine Worm specifically for this example. Abilities that trigger when something is put into a graveyard from anywhere are never treated as leaves the battlefield abilities, which means that they do not get any special handling. Like most other triggered abilities, these trigger based on the game state immediately after the trigger event happened. Immediately after being put into the graveyard, Deadpool does not have a Shuffle Me In ability, but Worldspine Worm does. Therefore, Worldspine Worm would get shuffled into its owner's library, but Deadpool wouldn't. For more info on how these abilities are handled differently and some more practice telling them apart, check out my video on triggered abilities that look back in time. Okay, how about this? Let's say that you Deadpool this Marrow. In that case, Deadpool would have an ability that sets its power and toughness to the number of cards in your hand. Conversely, Marrow would have no ability that sets its power and toughness, meaning that it would die immediately. That same logic would hold for abilities like Devoid or Changeling. Deadpool would be colorless or have all creature types as appropriate, but the other creature would go on to be whatever its mana cost or type line would indicate. Experienced viewers might recall that because of how layers work, gaining and losing Devoid and Changeling usually doesn't work out this way. Because the layer where ability adding and removing happens is after the color and type changing layers, gaining or losing abilities that affect color or card types and subtypes usually doesn't have any effect. Now, Deadpool has a text changing effect though, and those apply before all those other types of abilities, meaning that it actually works the way that a normal human would expect that it should. Next up, let's say that you're Deadpooling this Diregraph Ghoul. Does Deadpool enter tapped or untapped? And to answer this, we're going to need to know a little bit about how replacement effects work. After applying replacement effects, the game checks to see if any other replacement effects now apply to the event that's happening in the game. After exchanging text boxes with Diregraph Ghoul, Deadpool now has an ability that makes it enter tapped, which will then apply to this event. Okay, well, what if you exchange with a clone that is a copy of Grizzly Bears? I don't think it should be very controversial to say what the clone looks like. It'll have Deadpool's text box, but otherwise look just like it did before. To determine what Deadpool's characteristics are, let's recall that continuous effects apply in layers, and in layer 1, the clone will become a copy of Grizzly Bears. Then in layer 3, the text-changing effect of Deadpool will apply. Since the clone has Grizzly Bears rules text at this time, that is what Deadpool will end up with. Things get a little bit more interesting if you were to somehow be able to exchange text boxes with a clone that wasn't copying anything. Now in that case, the Deadpool would acquire the clone's ability that lets it enter as a copy of something. Similar to the Diregraph Ghoul example, this replacement effect would then become relevant, so the Deadpool would enter the battlefield as a copy of whatever creature you chose, say a Grizzly Bears. And once it's on the battlefield, there would be a copy effect acting on Deadpool in layer 1, which gives it the characteristics of Grizzly Bears. In layer 3, the text boxes would be exchanged, meaning that the clone would have the Grizzly Bears text box, not Deadpool's. The same idea applies if you were to make the Deadpool that was already on the battlefield a copy of something else, such as with True Polymorph. And hey, I know a lot of people are wondering what would happen if you copied a Deadpool, like with the Splinter Twin. So if you have Splinter Twin enchanting Deadpool, you can tap the Deadpool to make a token that's a copy of it. Now, if you've been a fan of the channel for a while, you know that copy effects do not take into account text-changing effects when determining what the copy looks like. Therefore, when the Splinter Twin ability resolves and creates a Deadpool token, it will have the normal Deadpool ability. This will allow it to change text boxes with another creature as the token enters the battlefield. And at end of turn, you would have to exile the Deadpool token. Well, that's what would happen if the token was still around at the end of the turn, but it probably wouldn't be unless for some reason you chose to keep the token around instead of the original when the legend rule kicked in. Okay, well, what about if we made Deadpool a token via this Delina? We'll observe that the token is not legendary this time, so we don't have to worry about the legend rule. But there is one additional wrinkle here. The Deadpool token still exchanges text box with another creature, just like in the last example, but there is one extra wrinkle. Notice how with Splinter Twin, the trigger that makes you exile the token is not an ability that the token has. Rather, setting this trigger up in the game somewhere is just part of the instructions that you perform when you resolve the Splinter Twin ability. In contrast, Delina actually says that that ability is part of the token's information. This means that when you exchange text boxes between the token and some creature, that some creature will have the ability that makes you exile it at end of turn, and the token will stick around forever. I guess this could be good or bad depending on how you see it. your token sticks around and their creature dies, but they don't have to use the Deadpool ability to give you a card in order to get rid of it. For a full breakdown on why these two work differently and some more practice with this concept, check out my video on Divine Visitation plus Hoffrey. You know, it's also possible to exchange with stuff that's not normally a creature, like, for example, this Sky Skiff. If Deadpool exchanged text boxes with this, Deadpool would have Crew 1 and Flying, but it would stay being a 5/3 because power and toughness are not part of the text box. If you crewed Deadpool, it would become an artifact creature, but its power and toughness would not change. Well, what about this Sky Skiff? Well, it would have Deadpool's text box, which unfortunately does not give it any way to animate itself. It would not be possible to make it into a creature without jumping through some hoops. It would still be possible to activate the 3 sacrifice this creature ability, even though it is not a creature. And that's because if an ability says this something, the game interprets that to mean the object that ability is on, regardless of whether it actually fits that description or not. This is similar to how abilities that use a card's own name in them work, like what we talked about earlier. You might also be interested to know how it would work if Deadpool exchanged text boxes with a planeswalker. Well, the good news is that it still is possible to activate planeswalker abilities, even if Deadpool isn't a planeswalker itself. The bad news is that the ability that gives planeswalkers loyalty as they enter the battlefield is part of the game rules, not part of its text box, so the Deadpool would be starting from 0. Fortunately, it would not die immediately because having 0 loyalty counters is only a problem if you're a planeswalker too. Now, if you're interested in exploring this interaction in more detail, I covered a similar scenario in my video about Gideon the Oathsworn and Imposter Mech. Whew, that is a lot. Let's cool down with some challenge questions to test your understanding. First up, we're going to exchange Deadpool with this Kaito, Bane of Nightmares. Okay, well, all that stuff that we said earlier about being able to activate loyalty abilities and starting with no loyalty is still true, which means that if you were to, up until the point where you uptick, Deadpool will still be a 5/3 without hexproof on your turn. Once it does get a loyalty counter though, that static ability will apply as normal, adjusting Deadpool's power and toughness and giving it hexproof. Remember, being a ninja will overwrite the creature types Deadpool normally has. Well, that wasn't so bad. What about this Thassa? Funnily enough, because Deadpool is not an enchantment, if your devotion is too low, Deadpool just won't have any card types at all. This is perfectly fine and it will stay being on the battlefield and still count as a permanent. It just won't be a creature. Now this also means that it loses all its creature types too, by the way. And remember, Deadpool's mana cost is unchanged, so it will not count towards your devotion the way a regular Thassa or even a copied one would. Alright, what if we exchanged with this true name Nemesis? Actually, I guess it might not be obvious that we would be able to do this in the first place, but I'll spoil this one a little early. Deadpool's ability doesn't do any of the things protection protects against. In particular, it doesn't target. Now this means that protection won't stop it at all. The same is true for other things that look for targeting, such as ward or hexproof. As Deadpool is entering, its controller will choose a player. Deadpool will have protection from that player. True name Nemesis won't have protection from anything. And finally, let's say that we're going to exchange text boxes with this Dryad Arbor. And I hope you'll agree that I've saved the best for last. First of all, we remember that we only exchange the text box, not the type line. Aside from the fact that Deadpool won't be a forest or a Dryad, that also means it will not acquire the color indicator that makes Dryad Arbor green. This is one you're going to want to check the Oracle text on if it comes up. Most things that are a different color from what you would expect based on the mana cost do that with a color indicator, but sometimes it's from an ability that the card has. There are only a handful of situations where this distinction is important, but this is one of them. Now, let's talk about the part where it's not a forest. You remember how we said that the ability planeswalkers have that gives them starting loyalty is part of the game rules, not their text box. Well, guess what? The same thing is true for the ability basic lands have that lets them tap for the mana. So it turns out Deadpool will not have any abilities, and the Dryad Arbor will still be green and still be able to tap for mana, which, to Wizards' credit, is exactly what you would expect from looking at the Dryad Arbor, bearing in mind that reminder text is not intended to have in-game significance. Pretty cool, right? And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? If you have any other Deadpool questions, be sure to let me know in the comments. Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.